I'm hitting record, and Jonathan Taylor will tell you a little bit about himself, and then we're going to talk about too close, too separate in relationships. Have at it.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I missed that. I'm John Taylor. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I practice outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. My main area of expertise is sexual addiction and related issues. So I do a lot of relationship work, and I do a lot of trauma work as well. So this group for me each week is just a chance to talk about some things that I really like, which is how relationships work in recovery and how we can make them work better. And also to interface with people who are in the trenches, who are living this day in and day out. I learn a lot from these two. I've been thinking a lot about the first one we did with me was last week. And I'm just thinking about the questions and some of the scenarios that some of our participants were dealing with. And I really appreciated the opportunity to share some of my experience and some of my expertise with that. So today, we're going to be talking about whether we're too close or too separate in relationships. And I think navigating this balance is really critical for a healthy recovery, whether you're an addict in recovery, whether you're a spouse or a family member. Because I think one of the things that gets distorted and out of whack really quick in addiction is navigating kind of our own space and our own needs. So I'm going to share my screen for a second. I want to show you this graphic. It'll kind of help us discuss this, whether we're too close or too separate. So can everybody see that? There's a big white circle, black square around it. So this is known as the Circumplex Model, and that's a really convoluted word, meaning this is a model for how systems interact with each other. On one end, we have cohesion, or the amount of closeness and connectedness we have. And on the vertical axis, we have adaptability, which is the way to which we respond to chaos. So we're going to be looking at the cohesion piece, the connectedness piece here. You can see that we have two extremes. So on one end, we have disengaged. What this means is that we are not close at all. In fact, separateness is what we choose over closeness in a disengaged system or a disengaged relationship. On the other end of the extreme, we have enmeshment, and enmeshment just means we're too close or there's not enough boundaries. And we can see these extremes come up in a lot of families, even when addiction isn't present. In fact, one of the pieces of side work that I'm doing, or a growing area of expertise for me, is working with men who have enmeshment issues or who too close with their moms. And one of the things that we see on that enmeshed or that too close side is that when we're too close in one system, we don't have room for a new system. So for example, with these men that I work with who are too close with mom, they don't have a lot of room for a new love relationship, or they don't have a lot of room for loyalty to a spouse, because mom's emotional needs and mom's world kind of takes over his world, and he feels really conflicted about choosing a partner of his own choosing, because he feels like that's a betrayal to mom. And we can even see that beyond relationships between sons and mothers. If you'll notice down here at the bottom, in an enmeshed system, its hallmark is that we have very high loyalty and very high dependency. So the identity is focused on the we, and there's not a lot of room for the we's or the I's in those systems. So on the other end, in the disengaged or the not close enough family, we have a lack of closeness, and there's a lack of loyalty, and there's high independence. Now you may be looking at this and you may be thinking, like, I have relationships where there's a really good reason why I'm disengaged, or I have relationships where there's a really good reason why I'm right on top of it and we're really, really close. And that's good, because I think with any continuum, the middle is not the right answer for all the time. So for example, my youngest is 5, almost 6 years old. And when he was learning how to walk, this kid thought that he belonged everywhere. And that there was nothing dangerous about the world around him. So he really liked to beeline for the street. I don't know if it was because he liked the movement of the cars or he just thought that was a fun place to be. So whenever I was outside with him, I was literally right on his heels. And there were times where I saw him running for the street where I would have flown through the air and tackled him had I not been able to get to him in time. But there was lots of scooping up, and he turned to me with this face full of rage and just this look of, why are you doing this to me? And I have a life to live, in all of his 2-year-old fury. That was a situation where the enmeshment and me determining what his safety was going to be and me determining the rules of engagement, that was necessary. We may experience that in a relationship with a loved one who is sick or incapacitated. We may experience some of that in times of crisis where the family system kind of pulls in and we kind of rally around the relationship and keeping that in place. So there's times where that more close model is something that we might need. The more disengaged side, or the not close enough, again, there's going to be times where we do that. Like if you are the spouse of someone who has an active addiction and you've discovered affairs, or you've discovered secret bank accounts, or you've discovered that maybe they're not loyal to you and don't want to be in the relationship with you. So you may pull back. And again, that's kind of that cocooning, getting your own bearings again and figuring out what you need. So there's times where either closer to either end of the spectrum may be appropriate. And the key is figuring out where do I need to be and why do I need to be there? Because often we can get really close when closeness hurts us, and we can get really far away when too far away really damages the relationship unnecessarily. So some things to think about in a system that's too close. Why do systems disengage? Sometimes there's a lot of chaos when we come together, and we may not be able to navigate really well kind of negotiating the needs of a lot of people. And so in a disengaged system, that's a sign from the system that we need some separate space, and we may need to figure out the me before we do the we. Also, systems can disengage because there's a lack of skill. In the spirit of self-disclosure, I grew up in a pretty disengaged household, and I think one of the reasons for that is we literally did not have the skills for being close together. I don't think my parents knew how to do that. Me and my 5 siblings did not figure that out on our own. And that's something into adulthood we've really had to have some conversations around and look at, and we've had to get some actual skills. This is how you have conversations that have a lot of emotion in them, or this is how you have a conversation when you express your needs. So sometimes the system will separate because we just don't know how to be any closer than we're being. Sometimes the system will disengage too because it's safer. Again, if we're with somebody who it may be dangerous or unpredictable, our body may tell us to move back. Our body may tell us to get safe, and so we may have a system that gets disengaged. Also looking at maybe why systems enmesh or get too close, and being able to gauge kind of what your need is there. Sometimes one party in that system or both parties in that system have overwhelming needs that they don't know how to navigate on their own. So, back to my work with men who are in a relationship that's too close with their mother, mom may have a lot of anxiety, or mom may have heartache in her relationship with this boy's father. And so her need for a partner may be so overwhelming that she puts that need on her son and kind of gets him to be a stand-in for dad. She may confide in him secrets or emotions or things like that that are too big for the kid, but they're also too big for the parent, and the parent doesn't know how to do that. So if you're in a relationship where it feels like I'm getting a lot of extra from this person that doesn't feel very good, that may be one of the signs that we're too close and there's not enough boundaries, and you may want to examine, what are my boundaries and why is that coming up for me? Sometimes the system that we grow up in, whether that comes from our family or we'll see this in some religious systems, the emphasis may be on the we, and that's the most important. And once you're a part of a we, there's no time for me anymore. That depends a lot on culture, that it depends on religion, that depends on upbringing. So oftentimes when I'm working with folks, we'll find that the system that they grew up under, and it was a set of rules that worked really well for them until it didn't. Sometimes we need to reevaluate, is that still important to me? Is that still helpful for me? Is that still getting me what I need? out of life. And so sometimes if we have that too close relationship, we really have to examine the why are we too close and where is that coming from? And is there anything that I can do about it if I need to do something about it? Another reason why systems can get too close is there can be a lot of fear. What happens if I don't have you anymore? What happens if I don't know how you're feeling or what you're thinking or what you're needing? And so we can have this too close dynamic come because we're really afraid of what may come out on the separateness side of things. And that, again, we kind of have to be able to gauge where is that fear coming from? Is that an actual fear that, if I am a parent of a child who grows up with disabilities and I'm not close enough to them, I'm not engaged enough in their life, they may not make choices or they may not be able to support themselves in an independent life. And so we really have to gauge where is that fear coming from and how am I responding to that fear? Am I able to feel like I'm making a choice here, or is that fear pushing me into something that's a bit more reflexive and a bit more reactive? So we'll open up the floor now if you have questions either on this topic, too close or too far apart in relationships, or if you have any other questions, relationship things that you are dealing with in your recovery, I'd be happy to help out.
Or even relationship, like last week, it was better work relationships, better, so it doesn't even have to be in recovery. It's relationship issues. I was thinking while you were talking about the growing up, you talked about your family, and I was thinking how I've noticed it can be generational. If the grandparents, like you see it in a whole system where the grandparents were a little more distant, and then the next generation continues that whole thing, and how challenging it has to be for you're talking about you and your siblings learning how to do something different and kind of interrupt that system. And so I was thinking that has to be challenging, particularly if if that's a repeated system that you've grown up in.
Yeah, because I guess fortunately or unfortunately, those kind of relationships don't happen in a vacuum. So often when you make changes with your relationship here and now, there will be ripple effects out into your family. Like you'll notice yourself kind of pushing on maybe the multi-generational story of what it means to be a Smith, or what it means to be part of this family, or even what it means to be married to someone or committed to somebody. Often that individual change, that becoming more of a me, is going to push back on the we somehow. And systems don't like to change, even if it's not real functional. When it starts to change for the better, we definitely get feedback from the system that, hey, this is changing and we're not comfortable with this.
I was thinking too, how if you're growing up and you're forced into a system, like if you're on the spectrum and, say my natural inclination would be to be more connected, and the family system is we're more independent and disassociated and things like that, how uncomfortable that has to be, growing up feeling like, I was thinking, I would think I would feel like my needs were not being met. I was being forced into a container that didn't fit me well. That's, that's what I was thinking. And then the other thing I was thinking was how, because I was thinking about a couple of relationships, and one was when there was a crisis in a family situation, how, like parents, like they needed to focus on this particular sibling. And so I noticed that I have less needs. So like I become more disengaged because it doesn't feel like there's capacity for me to have needs within the current system too. So, so we do have a question. My husband is a sex addict. He got an STD test already, and we are attending 12-step meetings on a spiritual personal counseling for 30 days. During this time, he keeps asking me to have sex with him. I am very hurt for his cheating, and I don't know when to start. I don't know when to start being close to him. I had sex with him 3 times during the recovery, and I felt bad after. When is a good time to try to get back close to him? That's a great question, and that's
good question.
Yeah.
So that hits on a couple of things. First of all, I think sex is a really difficult thing to navigate in relationships because it's one of the few very tangible things we have that can show us the kind of connection that we have. So it may be something that one or both parties push for because it's how we know that closeness is there, even if closeness isn't there. So as far as time to try to get back close to him, I'm not a big fan of setting a date on the calendar and saying, well, we're going to take a break for 60 days. And then after 60 days, we'll be back on, because who knows where things are going to be at in 60 days. And I think it's far less about the time apart and more about why are you taking the break? So if you're in a situation where your partner has betrayed you and has had sex with other people, I would imagine that there's probably some things that you want to see or want to feel before you feel safe with them. Like if this is related to addiction, you may want to see your spouse get into some kind of recovery program. And you may even want to know, what are some of the tenets of that program? Like, what can I expect from you while you're working this? Are you going to be working steps? Are you going to have some accountability? Like, what's change going to look like for you? I think when we don't know what our partner's process is, or what process they're committed to, it's really hard to feel safe with them. It's hard to feel connected. So that can be one of the reasons why we feel bad after. It can almost feel like this self-betrayal. I just did this thing and my partner feels better, but I kind of feel like I still don't feel safe with this person. I don't feel connected. And that felt like that made me less safe. Another hallmark that you might want to look for, I think sometimes as a partner, when we find out that there's infidelity or there's addiction, the question may come up in our mind, do I want this relationship still? And we can feel really guilty for that. That ambivalence, I think, is really normal in a discovery process. I always say to my clients when I'm working with them, in recovery, all options are on the table. And until we have all options on the table, we don't have any options on the table. So that may be one of the things that you're considering is, what does this betrayal mean to me? And is this someone that I can feel safe with again? Where's my commitment at in the relationship? And sometimes that can take some time to figure out. So I am a fan of delineating an abstinence period. And again, that's not so much like we're going to do 60 days and then we're going to be fine. It's more, we're going to take this time off. We're going to cool off from sex because there's some wounding around that. And at the end of that abstinence period, we're going to reevaluate. And I would say ideally you're reevaluating that with a trained marriage therapist or individual therapist who can help you to determine what you need during that time and a plan for helping you get that. And then at the end of that abstinence period, we reevaluate. Am I feeling safer? Am I feeling committed? Do I feel like he's a safe person? Do I feel like he's committed? And how do I know that? And sometimes we get to the end of that abstinence period and we determine, I think I need some more time. This betrayal goes deep for me, or this uncertainty goes deep. I think in recovery, one of the things that we do have that we may not feel like we have a lot of is we have time to decide. We have time to figure out where we're at. And I think that's a lot of the task of early recovery is developing some safe boundaries around us so that we can start to feel our own feelings and think our own thoughts. And that way we evaluate, I think, a lot more accurately how safe we are and what we need.
I'm going to tag in on that too, because you said with a trained professional, like a marriage, sex addiction is one of those really specific things. Mm-hmm. And so I'd make sure that the therapist has training in working with this in particular. And I hang out with Rob Weiss a lot. So like on the webinars, when we have them in the evening, this kind of question gets asked, fairly regularly. And he's like, you don't have to have sex with somebody that you don't feel safe with, period. Yep. So, you get to decide. You have been betrayed. So you get to decide when and if you feel comfortable. Like John was saying, you can reevaluate it. And the saying that sex addiction isn't about sex, it's any form of addiction. My experience is that it's a form of escape. And so, going back to having sex with you, it still is a distraction, not, I'm sure lots of other things too, looking to reconnect and to feel like, okay, we're okay because we're having sex or whatever. But I guess I just want to be an advocate for you and go, you get to say when and if, it's okay. So.
Yeah. And that's a great point, Tammy. And I just add one more quick thing there. Oftentimes what betrayal highlights is that the disconnect goes deeper than sex. And that's what we start to discover. So as part of your feeling safer, you may say, like, I want us to be able to connect on recreation. Like, we need to have fun together. I want to feel intellectually connected with you and spiritual with you. I think sexuality is an expression of when all of those things come together or when they don't come together. And so all of those other parts that make a relationship meaningful, I think, are really helpful to work on, and they can help you gauge how safe you feel and how willing you are to be sexual with this person. And they're really important parts of a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, next question. I am a sex addict and the betrayer. I come from a deep enmeshed relationship with my now deceased mother. I get so afraid of bringing difficult thoughts and situations to my wife for fear of triggering her and getting in trouble. If it's just a fear I have and not a slipped action, is it best to share with her or keep with my program so I don't re-trigger her?
That's a good question. And this dives into, I think, the complexity of some of those too close or those enmeshment issues. You'll notice here, even with the parent deceased, there can still come that sense of something's off. The thing that catches my eye here is this getting in trouble dynamic. I'm assuming that if this questioner is on this webinar, they're an adult, they're over 18. And here's one of the parts of functional adulthood that I love and I hate. So functional adults can't be in trouble. Functional adults are responsible for themselves. So if you're in an interaction with another adult and you feel like you're in trouble, that's a sign that there's this younger part of you that may be projecting onto your spouse, that this is that mother-son interaction. In these too close relationships with mom, often mom's emotional state is what rules that little boy's world. And so the little boy gets really good at editing his reality and bringing only Prince Charming to mom because that's what makes her happy, or the really attentive listener, or the golden child, and keeping the rest of that stuff to himself because any emotions that weren't mom's were overwhelming to her because she was overwhelmed already. So I think this question is a lot bigger, or the answer is a lot bigger than do I keep it within my program or not? And I think it's really important to look at what's getting recreated with me, because if I'm in a relationship with my spouse who I experience her like my mom, chances are she's not like your mom. And you've either provoked or recreated that dynamic in the relationship because that's what we're used to. We all like to be in relationships where we feel skillful. So if we don't have great skills, we'll tend to either pick relationships or provoke relationships to meet our skill set. So I hear that you're really good at managing a woman and her emotions. And maybe you're realizing now that that's not working for you. A lot of these enmeshed men that I work with, or these men who are too close to their moms, they have to work on being able to express themselves so that they can feel room around them to be the person that they are. And so they don't have to have this secret life where they get their needs met. So again, this is something that I would approach with a professional. If you are working with a marriage therapist who understands the sex addiction dynamic and maybe even the enmeshment dynamic, to help to navigate that. This may be one of those things that your spouse, reeling from the betrayal, may be saying, I can't take a lot of what's going on for you emotionally, so I need you to work it in your program. That's very different than you making the decision for your spouse and perpetuating that, like, I'm a bad little boy because I'm feeling something negative. Or your spouse may say, and I've seen this in a lot of couples that I work with, I would just want to know what's going on for you, good, bad, or otherwise. If you tell me the truth about that, I can handle that a lot better than not knowing. So I think it's important to navigate there. And if internally you're feeling like, even with mom deceased and I can't break this relationship, you may want to look into doing some work around that. I do some weekend intensives. We actually have one coming up in January to help men on this enmeshment with mom issue. We call it surgically emancipating, so that you can experience what it feels like to have your own thoughts, your own feelings, to be in your own body and make your own decisions. Because for a lot of men, or a lot of people who come from families that are too close, even when those family members are gone, those rules carry on. And we can work on getting you some relief and negotiating a relationship that'll work better for you.
And I'm going to vouch for those programs. I know of people who have gone through those programs, and it has been transformative for them and for their relationship with their wife. So, I was thinking too, when you were talking about all that and great stuff, but how it must feel like there's a power differential in the relationship. So rather than being spouse, on equal partners in a marriage, there's a one up, one down, where she's going to be mad at me, or, I have to hide things or whatever. It's not a balanced relationship, which I think is, what the goal should be, is that, we're partners and walking side by side. So.
Yeah, I think that's where it's really important to have competent help with the relationship side, because often couples have to navigate that explicitly. They really have to look at how is the power working now, and how are we going to share that going forward so that it can be more functional for us. The truth is, there's not an ideal power dynamic for every couple. It's very individual, and we've got to talk about it.
That's a good reminder for me too, because I always think I want to be equal, but you're right. It doesn't necessarily have to be to make it happy. So, okay, next question. How can I help my partner? I have started 12 steps for addiction. She says the love has gone. She has PTSD symptoms. She's in counseling. I am responsible for the betrayal. I love her, but failed her. What do I do?
This is, questions like this are heartbreaking to me, because this is so real. I think often our behavior is a row of dominoes that may not stop falling when our behavior stops. And I think that's where a lot of intense pain can come, as we can recognize consequences continuing even after we've course corrected, and even after we've made some changes. So a couple of things here that I'm hearing in this question that I think are really positive. Sounds like there's some honest communication, being able to hear from your partner the love is gone. That happens. I think love is based on knowing people. And often we'll hear from partners that when they find out that their spouse has been keeping sexual secrets, they feel like, I don't know you. So there's often this reacquaintance period that needs to happen after safety and sobriety are established. There's also some recognition in here. She has some PTSD symptoms. That's also very normal for this kind of betrayal. She's in counseling. That's a really great resource that's in place. I'm responsible for the betrayal. You're taking responsibility for your own actions. You're really set up well there, I think, for the beginning of this. When it comes to what do, I think being able to have those open conversations about what's needed. If space is requested, give the space. If closeness is requested, if that fits within your boundaries and what you can handle and what's healthy for you, give the closeness. I think this is a lot about, there's a culture in the relationship that changes in recovery, which goes from the culture in addiction was my needs and my wants I will fulfill in secret. Your needs and your wants, I'll give you the idea that I'm fulfilling it, but maybe I'm really not. To now the new culture is we talk really openly about that. And I think for a lot of couples early in recovery, those are some painful conversations, because there may be some conversations around, this is how you've let me down, or this is what scares me about being in a relationship with you. That's also very valuable feedback, because if we're serious about repairing our relationships, we'll pay attention to that feedback. Instead of getting defensive, we'll incorporate it, and we'll really take a look at what we can do. So I think continuing to work your program, continuing to get well, and being able to define the kind of life that you want going forward, I would say is number one. And number two is being able to tune into the relationship where it's at and accept that. If we can be two people who have been through some pain together, then we connect on that and we talk about that. If we feel like there's some spark of hope and we'd like to work on that, then we get into some resources, some professional counseling, some books. We get into some resources that will help us to rebuild that. Know when it comes to being the one who's betrayed, your partner's really in the driver's seat for the safety in the relationship. You can work on you, and you can work on being a safer person, but really it's their decision to re-engage. And anything that we do to coerce or to move that decision ahead, because we're uncomfortable with the uncertainty, that's going to damage things in the long term. So really giving the space, really giving the time. If you have it in your heart to feel open and communicate that openness. Let your partner know that you're available, but don't push. It's an invitation, not a mandate. And then lots of time, lots of therapy, lots of support. These things can heal beautifully in time, but it's usually a journey, and it's usually a healing that looks much different than what either party expected or what either party felt comfortable with in the beginning. But we really take the cues from your partner about what she needs, and become attentive and become a man of your word. Do what you say you would do over and over and over again, and that's how trust starts. That's how trust gets a chance to be rebuilt.
Yeah, and I agree. Some other resources for her and for both of you, but there are a number of podcasts on sexandrelationshiphealing.com, and there's a lot of good information, kind of like what to expect. It kind of gives you a little bit of, and for her especially, like you have PTSD, you are angry, you are hurt, you are all those. You feel numb because you're so shocked you don't even know what to do. And how long is this going to take, and whatever. So there's a lot of good information on there. There's going to be a drop-in group for partners starting, I think next week. I will get all that on there, but it will be just for partners with someone who's going to be there to moderate, and it will be where you can see each other. We're gonna have them for addicts and another for partners. So there'll be more resources on sex and relationship healing. If you aren't already on the mailing list, I'd invite you to check that out. Some of these recorded webinars are on there as well. So, and I agree with what John said about a professional. Both of you deserve support, going through all of this. So if we can help you find, the right fit, just let us know. So go ahead.
Rob's book, Out of the Doghouse, was published about a year ago. It's written specifically for these situations, and I think it does a really good job on the education piece, what's going on, and I think gives you a pretty firm plan of action going forward, things that you can do to ensure that trust can be rebuilt if it's going to be rebuilt.
Yes, that's been... I answer the emails, and lots of people refer to that book. So I know that one's, making a dent in it. So next question. This is from a woman. My husband is a porn addict who is in denial. He would play very passive aggressive games when he would tell me he was hurt because I never initiated sex. So when I would, he would use tactics to avoid sex for weeks. And when I would go from understanding to frustration to anger, he would then say, we never have sex because I'm always angry. He did it enough to where I have anxiety around sex. I have disconnected my emotions from sex because of it. He seems to be trying to connect now. So how do I get to the point to trust him again?
Yeah. This sounds like Sex and Addicted Relationships 101. Lots of confusion, lots of projection, lots of whose feelings are whose. The thing that's coming to the surface for me right now is I think it's really important to be able to gauge accurately where your partner is coming from, because spouses know this a lot, that they can take the signals that are available to them, and they can make an assumption of where their partner may be at in recovery, and only to find out that assumption wasn't correct or they were misled. So kind of understanding what your individual relationship cycle has looked like. Is this a honeymoon phase where it feels like we're more connected now, he's more available, meaning like we're just headed for the next big fight or the next big disconnection? Or is this actually representative of some changes that have happened internally? So the questions that I would be asking myself, if I were in this position, I'd be asking what tells me that he'd be a safe person to connect with? Have I seen some changes that he's made, and have I seen him maintain those changes consistently? Have I seen him be able to take ownership for that dynamic of either I'm not sexual enough, or now I'm being too forward and he's got to withdraw? Can he own his part in that? Can he take some responsibility there? I think another piece to look at is this participant said they've disconnected from their emotions because of it. I think looking at what's your own willingness to reconnect with those emotions. Does it feel like it's the right time for you? Sex is one of those things that I think, unfortunately, in our society, we don't believe that it's a consent thing, although it totally is. Consent meaning that both parties have to give a very strong hell yes to it. I'll put up a link in the chat here. There's a video on YouTube that compares consent to offering somebody tea, and how we don't give tea to unconscious people. And if somebody says no to tea, we don't pour it down their throat.
Yeah, I've seen that.
So I think it's important for you to look at, am I willing to go there with him? And if you're not, I think that would be understandable given the circumstance. If you feel like you may need some individual support or some individual healing to get to the place where you could say, I've reconciled with who I am as a sexual person, and this is what I want, and this is what I can do, then you might want to explore that. I think that piece, though, about your partner being able to accept his part in this is really key. The Stages of Change model by Prochaska and De Clemente, they studied people who quit smoking back in the 70s, and we found through continued research that these stages of change actually line up really well with any change that people are making. And in pre-contemplation or contemplation or even preparation stages, we're not quite taking responsibility for ourselves yet. We're more looking at, what can I get out of this change deal versus what do I need to change? And so if for your partner, the locus of control is still somewhere else, my wife's not approaching me or my partner's not approaching me the right way, I would say those are some danger signs for you. That's not going to be very safe. If there can be some ownership around his part in the relationship, his part in your feelings, then we may be engaged in a process where there can be some healing that happens there. That again is where I think some professional help really comes in handy. The conventional wisdom without an understanding of a sexual addiction or betrayal background is, if somebody's not wanting to have sex, that's abnormal and it needs to be addressed. The truth is, if somebody's been betrayed, there's really good reasons why they don't want to have sex. And we've got to be able to hold that, because sex at that point could be a self-betrayal. So yeah, I think that's my thoughts on that question.
Well, and what I'm hearing is he's a porn addict, so it sounds like he is an active porn addiction. So, and I half wondered if he's doing all of these things to avoid sex, because there are a fair number of porn addicts who really are physically unable to have physical sex with someone. Yeah. So I also wondered if it was an avoidance. I'm going to blame you because I'm concerned that I can't function.
That's a really good point. So there's a couple of things with porn addiction specifically. Real life sex never compares to the sex that we see in porn because it's fabricated. That's not what real people having real sex looks like. And that's not even what real sex looks like. It's not educational, it's entertainment. And it's pretty distorted entertainment. So there can be some real fear around getting into a real connected, intimate relationship, because I see with a lot of the porn addicts I work with, there's an actual deficit in relationship skill and being able to tolerate closeness. And so we'll see a lot of avoidance, or we may even see it go as far as like anorexia, where the obsession is still around sex, but it's around avoidance of sex now instead of having. So I think that's a really good point to really know that your partner's in active recovery there and can see those dynamics and is addressing those, because that's not something that abstinence from porn is just going to make go away. We actually have to push into some of that uncomfortable, those uncomfortable feelings that come with closeness and come with the connection of intimacy and sex, instead of having those separated. That sex is something I do on my computer and intimacy is something that my spouse wants, but it's not really important.
Well, and if addiction is a mechanism to avoid emotion and connection and everything else, taking away the porn addiction is going to cause agitation, because all of a sudden now I have to feel feelings that I didn't want to feel. I have no place to just numb out. So it's complicated. And the other thing I think I thought of was why were you initiating sex? Were you doing it because he was kind of pushing you and saying you never did, so you're feeling like now I'm going to do it, darn it, because later you're talking about how I'm I'm disconnected from my emotions in sex. So I think what you're talking about is like, make sure you're looking at your own reasons of why you would want to, and make sure it's safe, for
Yeah,
you to do so. So,
definitely.
so this is a comment. Thank you for your support. You guys are amazing. Books and professional advice have taught me a lot. My husband read Out of the Doghouse and then put it in the garbage, but he learned a bit. So,
I will say this about Out of the Doghouse and anything that Rob reads. Rob does not mince words.
correct.
What we're dealing with in addiction and betrayal and infidelity, it's not something that we can take this meandering approach to. He's really direct in it. And I found myself, when I was reading it, I was like, whoa, like that is a pure dose of medicine. But it really is, I think, for men who betray, if they want a chance at that relationship healing and healing long term, they've got to wrap their heads around the fact that this is not something that they can just sit back and coast through to healing. They've got to be very active about it and move quickly to taking responsibility, because the longer they stay in that ambivalence or that pre-contemplation or contemplation, the more damage is done to the relationship. So yeah, it's a tough read. I'm sure a lot of copies end up in the garbage, not because it's a good book, but it's straight to the point.
Yeah, well, and there's two versions of it. There's the original version, and then Marnie Faree
That's right.
co-authored a version that's for Christian men. So the F-bombs, I think, were all removed from that particular version of it. But it's got the biblical context. So for
Yeah.
some people that will resonate. But he, like you said, he bottom line goes, dude, you messed up.
Yeah.
And for somebody who's looking to not have to experience discomfort, that's not a comfortable statement to hear. So.
Yeah.
So next question. During the discovery and rehab of my husband's sex addiction, I have noticed that in his denial, he also sees the world in a distorted way. Is it possible that he hears from me what he wants to hear and actually believes it? For example, he says, I promise things that are not true, but he really believes that way.
Yes, absolutely. It's possible. In fact, I don't know that I don't know that mental health is necessarily the ability to see reality unadulterated. I think mental health is to be aware of our filters, because all of us do this to a degree. I think what we see when there's increased levels of fear or pain is that that deception of our own filter is more and more enticing. I do see this commonly, especially with somebody. To me, this is one of those signs that we don't have full recovery taking root here. There may be more of a commitment to, and this is common in early stages of recovery, there may be more of a commitment to preserve my own comfortableness and my own sense of safety than there is a desire to establish safety in a relationship, which requires give and take, which requires the ability to say, you know what, I'm wrong, or the ability to say, I really, really want this, but I understand it's not the best for you, so we need to go back to the drawing board. This is a difficult dynamic to deal with, because it can turn into a big he said, she said type of a thing. And if we're interacting with somebody who's really committed to the distortion because it's more comfortable for them or it's more palatable for them, we're never going to win that argument. So I would say boundaries along the lines of even having these discussions. If we're going to get into what I said and what I promised to you, I'm not interested in doing that, because we rarely have the same version of events. What I would like you to focus on is your recovery and what you're going to bring to the table in our relationship to repair the damage that you've done, and what you're going to do to make things better. And I will do the same. I'll bring to the table what I can, and I will let you know what's within my power, but I have to be the one to determine that and hold myself accountable. In any relationship, it is not a sign of health, and it doesn't work long term to be babysitting each other or to be holding each other's feet to the fire. Relationships that work are relationships where two people come up willing to give, and they give because they're willing, not because it's demanded out of them. And if there's that dynamic going on, that's a relationship that's in trouble.
Yeah, I was thinking that, there are some things, like the mirroring, saying what I hear you saying is this, and
Mhm.
kind of the reflective conversations where, but I totally agree that if it's, I'm demanding this, you promised me that, and all of that, it's going to be completely counterproductive, and you're not going to get anywhere. So looking at what you have now, I think having a conversation probably with a trained professional to have the
Mhm.
dialogue of how are we going to move forward with this when we clearly are on different,
Yeah.
coming from different viewpoints. But if this is the path we want to be on together, how do we both get there together
Yeah.
rather than on our other sides of the mountain, so to speak? So,
Yeah.
in all of this, I hear the hurt, I hear the, the pain, I hear the, the sorrow, the grief, all of those things too. But I want you to know that there is hope. I mean, there
Mhm.
are lots of relationships that navigate their way through this, with resources. There
Mhm.
are fundamentally relationships that aren't supposed to make it, and the sex addiction and that just kind of is the last symptom. But
Yeah.
but
I'm I'm not saying that this relationship is in that place, because that's never for me to call, but some relationships, where recovery brings them is a recognition of, we're not a good fit. Um, this isn't a relationship that will work for either of us. And sometimes when I'm working with my couples, well, every time I'm working with my couples, I'll say there's two acceptable outcomes. One is that we're able to resolve this and we're able to get you the skills in the relationship you want to have. The second acceptable option is an amicable divorce, where we recognize from a responsible place that what each of us needs is not what the other one can provide, and that we're going to part ways so that we can open ourselves up to connection that does work for us and connection that does feed us. But that's something that I think only the couple can determine, and only the individuals in that coupleship can determine.
Okay, somebody's got a raised hand. I'm trying to figure out if they really mean to have their hand raised. We haven't normally permitted to talk, but
It is a super cute emoji, that
it
hand.
is, yeah.
So it's
Okay, so R, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're gonna, but I'm gonna permit you to talk. We're gonna try this one. So, okay. Did you have a question? Oh,
I do see the question coming
okay,
up here.
yeah, and it's muted. So, all right. So,
Okay.
um, all right. So let's see. Go ahead and, well, I'm unmuting, so, but go ahead and answer the question. So it says, my partner says that because I did not feel guilt and shame post acting out with other women, I am not an addict. Oh, but SLA step 4 talks about the lack of guilt and shame. So
Yeah, from a clinical perspective, guilt and shame alone is not diagnostic of whether there's addiction. We look at feelings of loss of control. We look at continuation despite negative consequences. We do look at feelings of guilt and remorse after acting out, vowing to never do it again and break that promise. Um, I think it can be common to be really disconnected from our feelings, especially guilt and shame, because for most sex addicts, what they've done is far, far away from what they're proud of and what they would like to admit to. So I would encourage you to do some examination with a therapist. If you're working with a therapist, with a sponsor, where is my guilt and shame? If I'm not feeling it, why? This can be something that if there's a big enough emotional disconnect, you may need a higher level of care. You may need to go somewhere for 28, 30 days or a couple weeks in intensive to be able to wrap your mind around your own feelings. For a lot of people in recovery, when D-Day happens and the secrets come out of the bag, life really changes, and it changes quickly. And then there's this sense of, I've got to keep up, I've got to keep up. And sometimes we don't give ourselves the room to feel what we need to feel. So I'd really dive into, where is that guilt and shame? And what's preventing you from feeling that? Um, I, I wouldn't say that shame is a necessary part of recovery, but I think it does point to us where we stepped out of line with our values. And it's a feeling that can really help if we can tolerate it. So I'd be really looking at, can you tolerate the guilt and shame? And if not, what can you do to get into a place where you would be able to feel those feelings that'll help you to take corrective action and sustain that corrective action?
Okay, and this person's saying, I do feel guilt and shame, but not immediately after.
You know, for some people, acting out is a dissociative thing. So we're really out of our bodies, we're really out of our emotions. So it may not be until an hour or two, or maybe even a day or two later, where we kind of come to ourselves again and the frontal lobe re-engages. So I'd say this is definitely something that you want to explore with a professional, and figure out what that disconnect between the action and the guilt and the shame means. Because if it is some dissociation, you can do some good work with a trained professional who can help you get back into your body and to be feeling things a little more real time, versus that delay.
And I would invite your spouse to engage in some of the podcasts and things like that. I think she'll hear some things that will help support her. I hear she's really hurt that you aren't feeling immediately guilty, and so I'd love to have her have some support around those feelings too. So we have time for one more quick question. You mentioned hope. My husband married me in July of this year. We met in 2015. Since then, he cheated on me, but he has cheated for other people for 20 years or more. I really wonder why this time will be different and he will stop acting out. He's over 60. And are there 70 and 80-year-old sex addicts? Yes, I can answer that. There. It doesn't matter your age. If you haven't gotten it taken care of, it's a problem. So
so there's definitely older sex addicts. The question you're asking is really important. Why will this time be different? Oftentimes, I think our relationships that continue to hurt us are built on the promise of what that relationship can be rather than the reality of what it is. So if shortcutting that question for you puts you back into the promise of what this relationship can be rather than the reality of what it is, I think it's important for you to examine, why do I think it would be different this time? And that may not be a question that you get an answer to readily, but I think it would be an uncomfortable question that'd be important to sit with, because that's part of the evaluation that partners of addicts unfortunately have to make is what will be different going forward, what can be different going forward.
We started late, it was my fault, so I'm going to ask you to answer one more because this one is right up your alley. So this one is my husband, who was incredibly close with his mom, but unable to be close with me, his wife. Heard her stories about his father's sex addiction affairs, etc., and how it hurt his mother. Sounds so like what you deal with.
Textbook.
Yeah. When my husband owns sex addiction and affairs when my husband's own sex addiction and affairs came to light a year ago, he was completely unable to see the similarities on how his mother felt and how I feel. To me, he said, get over it. And towards his mother seemed empathetic and angry towards his dad for what he did. Is the empathy or lack of empathy towards one person or different towards another, is that normal for a sex addict? And I'm going like, yes, because now it's him doing the behavior versus somebody else. But he has begun recovery with a trained therapist 2 months in. Any good tips on how to help him learn empathy, or is it better to let him learn this on his own through his own therapy and learning about himself?
I would say from the standpoint of his comfort, let him learn it on his own. From the standpoint of your comfort, do not let him learn it on his own. This is textbook, and I would say it may have less to do with the sex addiction dynamic and more with the enmeshment dynamic. We often see with mother enmeshed men that they're angry at the wrong woman. And so mom can do no wrong because that's the relationship that historically he felt very special in. It was tied to survival, especially if mom demonized dad in any way, if mom shared secrets about dad's life in order to gain sympathy of the child. He's got this real survival tie up with dad. So I think being able to lovingly offer resources and education can be really, really helpful. Ken Adams, who really pioneered the work on mother enmeshed men, he has 2 books, Silently Seduced and When He's Married to Mom. And in this situation, I would recommend When He's Married to Mom, because it really dives into what that enmeshment dynamic is about. It even talks about the role that sex addiction plays in that enmeshment dynamic. and then the burden that the spouse or his romantic partners end up carrying going forward from his lack of emancipation from mom. So like you're experiencing the lack of empathy, which for what the relationships are now, mom should be getting that. Mom, that's your stuff, that's your emotions. I have a family, I have a spouse now, I need to attend to this. That's where my commitment is at. And then mom gets the doting, attentive boy, which she's always had and has expected, and that dynamic's really enforced by guilt. So either one of those books, or on my podcast, the Thanks for Sharing podcast, episode 57, we interviewed Ken Adams about this. And that can be a good introduction. If you listen to that and your husband listens to that and you hear his story, it's probably time for us to talk. It's probably time for us to evaluate what he might be able to rearrange in his life and his relationships in order to allow for connection and attachment to his marriage, if that's what he wants. But we traditionally see with a lot of these mother enmeshed men, it's really their spouse that drives the looking at that. It's their spouse who's able to say, like, I'm sick of you being angry at me. I really can't take this being second fiddle to your mother or second fiddle to your addiction. It's time for a change. And that can be done, I think, in a loving way, not in this strict ultimatum. But yeah, that's how I'd answer that question.
Yeah, and we Ken Adams was a guest on the Sex and Relationship Healing podcast. So there's at least 2 podcasts on mother enmeshed men. But I also typed to you, look at John's website for information on that intensive. It's only over a weekend, right? It's like 2.5 days or something like that. So
yeah, we work from Thursday evening to Sunday afternoon. We stay in it, and these guys leave being emotionally emancipated and ready to commit, if that's what they choose.
Yes. Yeah. So consider that too. So I think we'll end. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you again, John, for all the information and wisdom. So appreciate it. And we look forward to next Monday's installment. This one will be on the website probably later this week. Scott, who loads them, has been on vacation, so he'll be doing a little bit of catch up, but he'll be on. So
okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.